Our next speaker is someone we're really thrilled to have. Shawn Vanderhoven is with the Wiseman Group, and in the past we've really been fortunate to have Shawn and his colleague Liz Wiseman speak to us, and they've done some terrific work in the area of organizational development and how you begin to think about this concept of multipliers, which is one of the New York Times best-selling books they wrote, and it's really how multipliers make everyone smarter. But Jeremy, in his day job, leads the management development practice for the Wiseman Group, and they really enable leaders and managers to think about how they magnify the greatest resource in their organization, which is their talent, and really how you expand and develop talent. So Jeremy is going to share some of the concepts that they've done. He's also developing a new book, I hope he may touch on, around focus. And in today's world, I think focus is one of the toughest things that we all balance in our lives, is how do we remain focused and how do we narrow our focus to really be present and get things done, and how effective leaders really have the ability to focus. But let me, everyone, welcome Shawn, and we're thrilled to have you come with us again. Great.
Thanks so much, Mark. Thank you. Oh, how fun was that last presentation? How many of you just can't wait to get out of here and start playing with ChatGPT in a way that... Has anybody been interacting with ChatGPT that way? Does anybody, just show of hands? I'm just curious to know from an audience perspective. So there's a lot of potential for loads of us. I found that to be very interesting. And in a way, it's a really nice dovetail. I'll just wait for the slides to come up. In a way, maybe it's a really nice dovetail into what we're going to talk about today. I'll kind of level set this idea. So my colleague Liz, she was working at Oracle, reporting to a team that was directly in the throes of growing Oracle for Larry Ellison. This is mid to 2000s. And she was responsible for developing the talent across the board in Oracle. And at the time in the Valley, there was all this hubbub about the talent wars. Who would stack the deck in their favor, essentially? Which company had the ability to hire the smartest people and keep them? Because, the idea was that you could just walk across the street to another company here in the Valley. And I think this was the case at the time. And so she noticed a phenomenon. And so here, let me see if you noticed this phenomenon as well. She noticed that there was a certain subset of leaders that as leaders interacted with there was a certain subset of contributors, very smart, otherwise talented people. They would work all this energy to hire these best and brightest in class. And there was a set of leaders within Oracle that as they interacted with those individuals, people played smaller. They took fewer risks. They calibrated their contributions. It was almost as if they weren't as smart. But there was another set of leaders that she noticed in the company that had the exact opposite effect. As they engaged with the people that they had been assigned to lead, otherwise the very smartest people that you could kind of hire, these people played bigger. They took risks. They stepped up, even if there was a little bit of space, they stepped up and they played big in meetings. It was almost as if they were smarter. Whatever the proverbial light bulb that was shining above their heads before that leader stepped into that room, man, it burned brighter. And she wanted to know, whoa, what is the difference between these two types of leaders? These leaders who seem to have this diminishing effect on others, where they shut people's intelligence off, versus these leaders who seem to be multipliers of intelligence, where people are smarter around those individuals. And at the time, there was a lecturer coming through. He came to Oracle. His name is C.K. Prahalad. Is anybody familiar with C.K. Prahalad's work? Unfortunately, we lost him to cancer around 5 or 6 years ago. But he was lecturing on this concept on what would it be like to lead in the age of information. Our friends in Mountain View had already kind of organized the world's information, and that model was being shared at large. I mean, information went from being extremely expensive to extremely cheap. For example, for all of those of you that were, when you were kids and you were writing a book report, let's say junior high, how'd you get that done? Where'd you go? Okay, some of us had browsers. For those of us that are a little more ancient like me, what was it like? Where'd you go? Yeah, you go. I heard library, I heard encyclopedia. Who went to the family encyclopedia set? Okay, there's a few of us dinosaurs in here. Information, and that information was probably old. It's not like families just bought those yearly. And so imagine how old that sets of volumes were. And if you went to the library, how old were the volumes in your local library? Well, they were extremely old. Information was wildly expensive. But then, as our friends in Mountain View kind of sought to organize the world's information, we moved from having information being extremely cheap to information being extremely expensive, being extremely cheap. And so as you think about this model, and now we have generative AI where there's this whole type of intelligence that we need to develop the skill to be able to harness. To unlock this, there are skills that are needed. So this, as Liz was listening to this, she heard this idea posited by CK. He said, in the age of information, and now in the age of generative AI, it's not what you know. Would it be ridiculous to expect any one leader to have all of the answers on a team? Yeah, that's a preposterous idea today, isn't it? That we would hire leaders to have the answers? Whoa. We don't do that anymore, and there's a reason. Because we recognize how much information is out there. But rather, what matters, the skill for leading in the 21st century is not what you know. It's how you access what others know. And in all scenarios. But before we get into this idea of multiplier versus diminish, now let me ask you, as I was talking about this idea of leaders who shut intelligence down versus leaders who access people's capability, have all of you had an experience where you've worked for somebody who shut you down, a diminisher, versus somebody who was a multiplier to you? Has everyone had that experience? You probably could even think of a few people. I just want you to yell out. Think of somebody who was a diminisher to you. They shut you down. You could not play at your biggest. You calibrated and held back. What did they do that caused you to play smaller? They took all the credit. They micromanaged more to start throwing them out. They belittled us. They judged us. They interrupted us. What else did they do? They had to be the smartest person in the room. What else? They were the ones that had to generate all the ideas. They dismissed everybody else's ideas. What else? It was my way or the highway. How much of your capability did this leader get? Shout out a percentage. Just shout it out. Yeah, so we hear a bunch of 50s. Any lower, higher? 10%. A lot lower. So these leaders, man, they don't get our very best thinking. They shut us down. Now let's pivot. I hope all of you have had a chance to work for somebody who was a multiplier to you. You did things for them that you didn't even know you were capable of. What did they do? How did they get your best thinking? They listened. What else? Throw them out. They empowered us. How did it look? How did they empower you? They removed obstacles. What else? What did they do? They trusted us. How did you know? They gave us responsibilities. They looked at us to make the decisions. They asked lots of questions. They were genuine. Anything else? They praised us when we did great work. They recognized our genius and they recognized our effort. How much of your intelligence did your multiplier get from you? Just shout it out so we can hear everybody's kind of collective experience. I've heard a bunch of hundreds over here. Shout it out. A bunch, everybody at once. What'd they get? Man, they get all of us, don't they? How many of you would say that your multiplier got more from you than you thought was capable of, just by show of hands? It's this phenomenon that we've all experienced. And what we wanted to know was, man, what is the difference between these two types of leaders that we all experience? Leaders who are intelligence multipliers versus these leaders who are intelligence diminishers. And so what we did was we had this suspicion that the way to get to this was to look through the eyes of the affected, that if we went to leaders, that it would be kind of hard to suss us out, especially diminishers. Why are you shutting people down? It's a hard thing to kind of like get some real introspective thinking. So what we did is we reached out to our colleagues in the Valley at first and then around the world, and we had initially 150 nominations, leaders who were reported, 75 who were reported to be intelligence multipliers, and 75 leaders who were reported to be intelligence diminishers. And we interviewed the people that reported to them, their peers, and their supervisors. And if they didn't have a supervisor, because they were maybe at the top of the dominance hierarchy, we interviewed past supervisors that they had reported to. And today I'm going to share with you what we found, the difference in how what their assumptions were and how they differed in their assumptions toward us, and what they did differently as a result of those assumptions. So as we get into this concept, multiplier versus diminisher, first let me ask you this question. Think of your diminisher. What did they assume about you? Just think about your diminisher. What did they assume about you? Yeah, that you're not smart, that you're going to need their help to figure things out. And what about your multiplier? What did they assume? That you have valuable answers to bring to the table, and that's what we found. We found that diminishers believe that people won't figure things out without their help, whereas multipliers believe that we are smart and we can figure things out. And as a result, what we found around the world, just like what you all said, diminishers get half of us, 50% less than of our capability, which we kind of heard just, roughly as we all shouted this out. And multipliers, on the other hand, they get almost all of us. And it's a phenomenon that we've all experienced. And let me ask you this. So I was doing this thing for the senior team of CRISPR. Do you know who CRISPR is? Has anybody heard of CRISPR? They do genetic, gene modification to fight disease and other things. Very, very smart people. And this fella raises his hand and he's like, hey, wait a minute, this is bullshit. You're not measuring intelligence. Okay. If we're not measuring intelligence, then what are we measuring here? I ask you, how much of your intelligence did that leader get from you? And you say to me, man, they were real diminishers. They got 50% of my intelligence. What are you really saying to me? Okay, effort. What else? Engagement. Yeah, this is our perceived, our perception of our engaged intelligence. Now, let me ask you a question. If a team believes that their leader is getting half of them, what kind of a problem do we have? All of you are in athletics. If you believe that your coach is getting half of your talent, what's it going to be like in the locker room? Yeah, you've got a morale disaster. When we perceive that our leaders are only getting half of our capability, because let me tell you what, we all show up to work for what reason? Because we want to do something awesome. That's why people show up. If there's one thing I've learned about studying leaders around the world, you learn a lot about contributors. And what I know to be true, and even this new brand of contributors, these younger kids that are coming up, and if maybe they only want to give 20 hours to work or 30 hours to work when maybe you were used to giving 80 hours to work, they still want to do something awesome. And so if we perceive that somebody's getting half of us, it actually turns into a little bit of a morale tragedy. Whereas if we perceive that our leader is getting all of us, maybe even more of us than we thought was capable of, what's the situation like in the locker room? Man, it's hard, but it's exhilarating. Let me ask you this question. What's it like to be overworked but underutilized? What's the emotional experience like? It's exhausting. Whereas when we're working hard, maybe we even feel like that we're slightly overworking, but we're fully utilized. What's the emotional experience like? Yeah, this is exhilarating. And I think that we all crave this exhilaration in life. We want to be stretched to the next level of contribution. And we're looking to work for a leader who sees our intelligence. And they have the skill and the capability to access that intelligence to the highest aim, to the highest level of contribution. So what we did was we We divided the research up into 5 functional areas. We wanted to know how these diminishers and multipliers differed. And first, how did they recognize people's superpowers and put those to work? Second, we wanted to know how they help people recover from error and mistake. Then we looked at what was the difference between these leaders in terms of the way that they set direction with their team. Next, we looked at how did they make decisions and how did they use us to make decisions in the team. And then finally, once the decision was made, we wanted to know how these leaders differed in delegating. So we'll start with how did they differ in recognizing our superpowers? And so maybe we should appropriately start with this young man's story. His name's Irvin Johnson. He's a high school ball kid coming in to his freshman year. On his first day of practice, right before, the varsity coach pulls him in, remember he's a freshman, and tells him how excited he is that he is coming to play at their school, and that he was aware that this young man had a habit of taking to town his seniors on the playground already as a junior high kid. And so you all know the answer to this. This high school coach says, Irvin, when you get the ball this season, I want you to, that's what he said, shoot. And so Irvin shot. And he continued to shoot. And they were killing everybody. They were just blowing people out. And he had to leave, duck out really quick after a game. And it was a home game. You know how the bleachers go. You pull them out, underneath the bleachers on one side. You've got the locker rooms for the home team. One side, you've got the lockers for the visiting team. And so he was walking up the stairs, leaned up against those big double doors, with the big metal bar to pull out. And he looked up into the stands. There was a bunch of kids home side that were still, having fun, being crazy. And then there was the parent section for his team. And he paused for a second because where his teammates' parents were sitting, what looked like a funeral, there was no energy at all. Now, he knew exactly what the problem was. What was the problem? Yeah, but why were they there? Yeah, because nobody else was involved. Now, first, you can imagine, this is a 14-year-old kid. He just feels mad. He's like, look, he felt defensive. He's like, I'm just doing what the coach told me to do, and I'm going to keep doing that. But he couldn't shake it. So after a few days, he said he remembers. He kept thinking about this. He kept thinking about the faces of his teammates' parents. He remembers where he was, walking. He said that he literally stopped as his brain was, kind of mulling over this challenge. And he realized something. He decided, man, maybe I need to do something different than what the coach asked me to do. What if I used my talent to amplify the play of the people that stepped on that floor with me? And so he did. And it was 7 years later, after Irvin made that decision, that a Michigan sports writer said, it's like magic. When Irvin Johnson steps on the floor, everybody plays better. And Irvin Johnson, who we came to know, Magic Johnson, he represents a kind of leader that hopefully maybe some of you have worked for. It was the kind of multiplier that we came to call the talent magnet, because they would figure out what people's superpowers were. They'd name it, share it, and put it to work on the team. And so, working for a talent magnet, you win twice. Once because your talents are being developed on the most important current projects, and second, because that's going to get you ready for your next gig. And interestingly enough, people that worked for talent magnets, what would you guess? Did they stay longer on that leader's team or shorter periods of time? Yeah, you'd think longer. But actually what happened was they had a shorter period of time in the research on those leaders' teams. Guess why? They got promoted. Now that's not a problem for a talent magnet. Why would you say? Yeah, because they're going to find that next person's superpower and they're going to figure out how to put that to work in the meanest possible ways. Now, if we saw an evil twin to the empire builder, to the talent magnet, it was the empire builder. How many of you worked for a leader that recognized that talent was important, pedigree, past jobs, etc., but they tended to hoard talent and resources, only kind of to use you for their bidding when it was kind of convenient to what they thought was important, or maybe would show them in the best light. Now, what happens when you are the trophy locked in the coach's cabinet? You lose twice. Once, you're an A player playing in a C or a D role. But what happens when it comes time for trades and promotions? Yeah, you get overlooked. So then, not only you punching way below your weight, you are also passed up for future opportunities. Next, we looked at how these leaders differed in the way that they helped people recover from error. I need a volunteer. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to pretend that this is an apple. No problem, right? Okay, so I need a volunteer. I need somebody who, does anybody here shoot a bow or a crossbow? Everybody rose their hand. So this fella, come on up. He's the one that rose his hand first. Actually, he was the only one that rose his hand. So come up here on stage. Here's what we're going to do. Who knows the story of William Tell? Who knows it? Anybody? Okay, so this is William. I'm William's son. Does anybody know it? He's not going to need a mic, but actually you can use it for effect for crossbow. Okay, so who knows the story of William Tell? Does anybody know it? Kind of walk me through this. Okay, so we're in the Swiss Confederacy. It could be, it could be kind of like it's a made-up story, but we're in the Swiss Confederacy. William is not willing to bow down to the new sheriff in town, so they grab me. I'm his son. They tie me to a tree and put an apple on my head. Okay, get your crossbow up. Okay, now, here's the rules of the game, they said. They said, William, if you can shoot the apple off your son's head, we're going to, somebody remember the story? We're going to let you both go. If you can't shoot the apple off your son's head, we're going to kill you both. Okay, so put your crossbow up. Now let me ask you all a question. Who's feeling pressure and who's feeling stress?
Dude with the apple on his head.
Yeah. What am I feeling? What am I going through? Keep that crossbow up. Why am I feeling stressed? I mean, look at me. What can I do in this situation? What's the difference? Why stress versus pressure? What's the difference? What's that? Yeah, he has the ability to control the outcome. Hey, man, thanks, Brock.
That was my technique. You good?
Yeah, he had the ability to influence the outcome. And here's what multipliers understand. They understand that it's essential that you put pressure on people to do their best work. But they need to feel like that they can control the outcome. And one of the ways that they did this was when people made mistakes, they would immediately go to the film room, or they would have a scheduled time to go to the film room, whatever that was. Whether that was reviewing sales proposals, it was reviewing product releases, and they would work through failures and try to figure out what can we learn from the mistake. Now, what happens when you work in an environment where learning from failure, extracting the learning, is just part of the culture, and then you screw up? What's the emotional response that you have? You know that there's time for film every week. You know how people are treated. Hey, we just figure out what we can learn from those things, and we're all learning from each other. All of a sudden, you're not in a situation where your limbic system takes over and you're freaking out that you're going to be exposed, even though there's a little bit of that, because that's human nature. It doesn't take our full emotional capacity and completely distracts us from our ability to do the things that we need to do. Now, the opposite. While multipliers recognize it's important to have a high bar and they demand our very best thinking, while they extract the learning out so we can recover from error, the opposite of this was the tyrant. Tyrants skewer people for making mistakes. And as a result, they don't just create an intense environment, they create a tense environment where people don't believe that they can control the outcome. This is no matter what they do, if they mess up, they're not going to be able to make the corrections necessary to be able to kind of still be good, in good graces with both the leader and the team. So people start to stress about the things they can't control. What do we know about errors and humans? What's that? They're inevitable, right? You cannot have any project. I mean, think of the concept of just the planning fallacy alone. Does anybody know this idea of the planning fallacy? The idea behind the planning fallacy is it's our inability, because we can't handle big data sets. Humans are terrible at estimating timelines and complexity. And so if you ask me how long something's going to take and how hard it's going to be, what's most likely going to occur? Am I going to get it just right? Underestimate or overestimate? Underestimate or overestimate, but we're more likely to underestimate timelines and difficulty. Sometimes we overestimate them, but the likelihood that we're going to get it right, well, actually, statistically, we know in any level of complexity, and this could even just be a project with a few weeks out, we are 99.9% unlikely to get that dead on. Now you think about what I just said. We are 99.9% unlikely to get a project dead on how long it's going to take and how hard it's going to be, even if it's just a few weeks out. We don't have the ability to crunch big data as humans. That's why it's so important for us, like with intelligence and the intelligence of our people, to learn how to be extremely skilled at asking great questions. And that's why your multipliers, I just show of hands. How many of you think of your multiplier? Think of one person who was a multiplier to you. How many of you would say they were brilliant at asking good questions? It is something that we found ubiquitously across the board, that leaders who get our very best thinking are incredible at asking questions. Tyrants don't ask us questions. They just show us why we're wrong. That stresses us out, so we're not able to do our best work. Okay, I need another volunteer. Somebody to come up to figure out, we need to see how far we can stretch this rubber band before it breaks. Now, I've done it a few times, so I know where the limits are, but I need somebody to help me figure out where the limits are. Who's my volunteer? Going once? Going twice? Man, they were all hoping you'd come up. Come on up, bro. Yeah, there was a few people who were pointing at you and smiling, and they just knew that you were the person that could come on up, man. Is it Mason? Yep. Hey, Mason. Okay, Mason, you're my boss. Come on over here. Let's get in the center. Okay, no, for sure, we're probably not going to break this thing. I mean, it only happens a couple times when I do this. So here's the thing. This is symbolic of the challenge level, the level of difficulty for the current project that I own as a contributor, reporting to my manager, Mason. Okay, so now let me ask you the question. Let me step off this little thing. How difficult is this challenge that I'm experiencing right now? How hard's my project? What do you say? Can I stay like this all day? Yeah, okay. So, what are Mason's options? I mean, I could have a side gig. I'm rolling Uber right now, doing a little DoorDash on the side, a little consulting. This is pretty light, right? What are his options? Okay, micromanage. It would be fun to try to tease out how we can get micromanaged in this scenario. Okay, so he can move away, which represents what? Increasing the challenge. Let's see it, Mason. Okay, what do you know about me? Right off the bat. Okay, you can see that I'm immediately starting to do what? I'm kind of getting pulled a little forward, but I don't know. What do you think? You think I can hold this for, a while? Keep my side gig? Okay, what are his options? Okay, he could pull back a little bit more. Okay, let's see it. What do you think, Mason? All right, what do you notice about me now? I'm a little off balance. Now, you guys think I can hold this all day? Okay, so what are my options? Let go. It's not great for Mason right now. We all know how attrition feels. Okay, my options are I could let go or I could change my position. And most likely, if I'm not going to let go, I'm going to lean into that challenge. Hey, man, thanks, Mason. What's the message? What does it mean? There's a fundamental idea communicated in that little object lesson. Okay, proximity reduces stress. Thank you. Another underlying principle. What does it mean? When do people do their very best thinking? When they're being stretched. When they're slightly off balance, but they know they're supported. And what people end up doing when they're stretched, when they're just outside of their comfort zone, is they lean into the challenge. That is when people do the very best thinking. Multipliers understand this, so they challenge us. They get the challenge just right. They challenge us to do our very best work, and it's hard. But we feel supported, so we believe, and we're able to lean into that challenge. Now, the opposite of this is the know-it-all. How many of you worked for a leader where they set future success or the future direction of the team in terms of their past successes? I'll say it again. How many of you work for a leader that the strategy that we're going to navigate going forward is based on what they've done in the past? What's the liability that we inherit in this situation? We're going to do the same things. There was another one here. What was it? Okay, the circumstances in the future are different. It reminds me of that idea. Do you remember that idea Stephen Covey used to say that the map is not the territory? What does it mean? I mean, it means a map is a symbol, it's a model of the territory, but it's not the territory. We don't get all the dimensions, the fine rocks, the plants, the everything. It's just a model that whenever we're looking at a map, we can't actually see the full territory that we're looking at. Now, not only that, we're always looking at models, but the territory in the future is changing. So any map that we have anyways is out of date. So if we have a map from our past leaders' successes, we inherit the liability of being completely unprepared for the future. And that is what the know-it-all did. They tended to base the future plans of the team on their past successes. Now, if you contrasted that with leaders who are challengers, they challenge us to do things that they themselves have never accomplished, and they don't know the answer. Because they recognize that the future is changing, and what got us here will not get us there. And so they know that their job is to tap into the team's collective intelligence to chart a new path to accomplish that future goal. Next, we looked at how did these leaders differ in the way that they made decisions, and here's what we learned. There was this particular leader named Sue Siegel. Has anybody met or worked with Sue Siegel here in the room? Okay, Sue had this really interesting way of making big decisions. Decisions where you're rolling out a product, not an innovation decision, but decisions where you've got to place a bet on a path. You can't go two different paths simultaneously. So she had these debates, and she had these 3 rules. So here was the rules. If you were asked to come to one of these debates for working for Sue, she would tell you that you needed to bring your team's very best thinking on the path that they believed the team should take. And if you did not bring your team's very best thinking to advocate for that path, you were fired. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2, if during that debate you weren't able to debate for and against your own point of view, you were fired. Rule number 3, if you left the debate and you didn't get your way and you went to the proverbial water coolers, whatever that was, and you spread discord, fired. Now, it seems like with all this firing that this would be a limbic system nightmare and that people would be really uncomfortable working for Sue, but that's not what they said. In the interviews, they said over and over again, Sue was the most exhilarating leader we had ever worked for. Why? What's that? They knew she was going to take out the trash. Okay, fantastic. Why else? If you've got this, what do these rules mean essentially? What did she want? She wants your best thinking. She wants your A game. And people said that they brought their A game, and there was rarely anybody who was fired because they took that serious. Those 3 rules, when we asked Sue about those 3 rules, that's what she said. Let's put all this energy in hiring these extremely talented and capable people. How is it possible that I wouldn't use their intelligence to place big bets? But rather, I gave them runway and space to get their very best thinking up front so we could debate the possibilities. So during the rollout, everybody understood the validity of the decision. Now, what's the opposite? If you've ever worked for somebody who's a decision maker, they make decisions unilaterally, by themselves, often fast, maybe with a few people in the circle of trust. But what happens when leaders make decisions unilaterally on their own during the rollout? Yeah, everybody debates the validity of the decision, but it's the wrong place to have the debate. Final thing that we looked at, how do these leaders differ in delegating? Multipliers versus diminishers. And what we learned, we actually bumped into a fellow that lives here in the area. His name is Doug Allred. He was the 50th employee at Cisco Networking Systems as they were kind of going through their crazy growth. This is John Chambers. Doug was promoted to be Cisco's first vice president of support. And on his first day of reporting in John's office, he sits down, and John says to Doug, hey, Doug, here's how we're going to run things in support. First of all, we're going to hang our hat on support. But in all things support, I'm going to give you 51% of the vote. I'm going to keep 49% of the vote, but I'm going to hold you accountable for 100% of the outcome. What was John saying to Doug? What does this mean? 50% of the vote, 49% of the vote, but I'm going to hold you accountable for 100% of the outcome. Okay, it means trust. What do you mean? Why does that mean trust? Okay, he's saying for sure you get to make the decisions, and we're going to have to live by your decisions. What was he saying about himself? 49%. What was he trying to communicate? Yeah, he's saying, hey, you got this, but what's my role going to be in this? If you own 49% of a venture, how engaged are you? Can you afford to just let that burn? No, he's saying, I am all in, and I'm going to passionately fight for the things that I think are the best things for you to do. But you're going to actually be the tiebreaker. You're going to make the decision. But then when it comes down to accountability, I'm going to hold you accountable for 100% of the outcome. Now, what we know is that multipliers are like investors. They understand that if you want to grow the capability of a team, you have to give them ownership for the how. You can own why, maybe the purpose of the organization, if you own that organization. You can even co-own the what of a project. But when it comes to getting the work done, they have to have full ownership of the how. And what we've learned about investors is that they grow organizational capability by holding people accountable for the how. Now, if there was the evil twin of the investor, well, what was the first thing that almost everybody says when I ask if you worked for a diminisher and how they do it? What's the opposite? It's the micromanager. Who here has worked for a micromanager? What's it like? It's suffocating, it's exhausting. Why? Okay, it's confusing. Why is it all of these things to work for a micromanager this way? Whether, if you remember that movie, The Devil Wears Prada, that's that saying, the devil is in the details. If you've worked for a micromanager, you know what that means. When they're constantly telling us how to do things, they're taking our work, they're fixing our work. I don't know. And what are they doing with our slides? Man, you work for a micromanager, and what do they do to the slides? They're always messing with your slides. What we learned about micromanagers is that when people work for a micromanaging leader, it completely crashes their confidence. It's actually the most insidious form of diminishing at all. So, as we looked at this equation, what we learned, and see if you can check this against your own experience. Multipliers believe that we are smart and that we can do incredible things. They name our talents and our superpowers to put those to work. They help us learn from our mistakes. When they set direction, they challenge us to do things that they themselves have not done. They use us to make critical decisions. And finally, they hold us accountable. But they give us the space to do our very best work. And as a result, multipliers get 2 times the intelligence versus their counterparts, the diminishers. But it's actually not the most interesting idea that I have to share with you today. What happened as we first shared this research in 2010, and luckily, more than our parents bought the book. You never really know when you come out with a book how far that will be spread. But multipliers started to be shared, and organizations were bringing us in. And then people would come up to us and say, you know what? I work for this boss. He's great. They do these diminishing things. I don't think that they realize it. But they're not these kind of headline-grabbing narcissists that eat children for breakfast. But rather, they seem like they've just got pretty good intentions, and they sometimes shut me down. I don't think they know about it. Oh, that's an interesting idea. We started to collect those, and what we found was the accidental diminisher. We learned that most of the diminishing in any organization is just like the standard bell curve. On the one hand, you do have these kind of real demonic, devilish individuals that they do think they are the smartest people in the room, and they let everybody know. But actually, the majority of the diminishing in organizations was an accident. It was leaders with the very best of intentions showing up in a way where they didn't realize it, but the way that they engaged with their teams made it difficult for their teams to perform at their best. So we wanted to know, what are the ways that leaders with the very best of intentions accidentally shut people down? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a game. I'm going to share with you 9 ways that we found that these leaders do this. There was more, but I'm going to go big on the 9 that we found to be the most prevalent. My challenge to you is to see if you can see any of these in yourself. Now, so you don't feel kind of exposed here. I do all of these things. And you can even be asking the question, where might some of these things come from? Why do these things show up in leadership situations? Okay, so you know the game. You're looking to see if you can see any of these in yourself. Here we go. Any of you wired with ideas? You can't shut the ideas off. You're an idea fountain. You're in the shower and they keep coming no matter what. You can't stop the ideas from coming. And what do you want as an idea fountain? What's the goal? Your intention's what? Yeah, you want more ideas, But what can it be like to work for somebody if you're not wired that way? Well, it's kind of like a wild goose chase. You're like, okay, we're going after these 10 things and these 10 things. Well, I guess they must have got ChatGPT 4 because there's 70 more things. And pretty soon, people just freeze because, man, they don't know what to execute on. Or how about the leader who is full of energy? You know, they want their energy to be contagious. Their goal is they've got a point of view and they're always sharing their point of view. But what can it be like if you're not wired that way? Yeah, it can be exhausting. As a matter of fact, there's a universal response that we all have if we see our always-on leader walking down the hall. Because you know you ain't getting out of that hall without, maybe an extra hour and 40 more things to think about. Or how about this? How many of you, you're compassionate. You hate to see people fail. And so maybe you've got younger talent and they're, doing the death wobble on their bike, and before they, go on the curb, you run over there and steady the ship. But what happens if we rush in too often and too early as a leader? What's it like for others? Yeah, they start to worry, or we start to worry if we're being rescued, that we don't have what it takes to get the job done. And so we just start to feel like we have a little bit of learned helplessness. Okay, how many of you would say that initiative is kind of just who you are? You tend to move fast, and you like to set the pace for your team, like a pace car. So you get out in front of the team, and your goal is to get people to go fast and to move at this intense pace with you. For those of you that can recognize that this is totally me, how many of you, what's your intention? You want to lead by example. We want people to be able to kind of step up into that position. But what happens when a leader gets too far ahead of the pack? We end up creating spectators instead of followers. People slow down, it turns out, when the leader gets too far ahead. I mean, you decide who the leader is and who the contributor is in this little video. I mean, because about in this situation, the only thing that contributor do is yell, "Hey, boss, when you lap me, tell me what you want me to do." Or how about... Well, first, I guess I should do a little bit of confession here. So this is my family. This is years ago. So they're all bigger than me now. Sam's the one in the middle. He's the youngest. He's 5 or 6 inches taller than me. That's my sweetheart, Annie. Joseph's the oldest. He's 22. Sam's 19. And then Seth's my dancer. He's 20. They're all in university right now. But at this time, a few years before this, I was working on the second edition of multipliers, and my son, Sam, was at a 5th grade health class, and he had learned about visceral fat. And he comes home and he says, "Dad," and he was a little emotional, I could tell. He was a little, maybe almost holding back some tears. He said, "Dad, I'm worried that you're fat." That's the first thing he said to me. I was like, "Oh, thank you, son." Confidence endearing. And he's like, "Well, here's the thing, Dad." And I could tell he was really feeling emotional. He said, "Dad, I learned about this kind of fat that stores around your heart and your lungs." And he even said to me, like, "Dad, if you buy a steak with marbling, it's the marbling." I was like, "Man, they're really teaching you stuff." He goes, "Well, it's good in a steak, but it's not good for dads." And I'm really hanging on to learn this. I was like, "Okay, what are you saying, son?" He's like, "Well, what my teacher told me is that people that sit a lot are going to get a lot of visceral fat, and then they're going to have a heart attack." And he kind of, started to tear up a little bit. And I thought, okay, so Sam, what should we do about this? You do see that I'm sitting a lot. And I work. This was before all the rage of standing desks. Only a few, select people knew about standing desks. And so I was like, "What should we do here?" And he says, "Why don't we run around the block before the bus comes to get me?" I was like, "Hey, this is great. I'll be up." I was waking up at 5, working for a few hours. Why don't you run off to bed tomorrow morning? You get me up, and we'll run around the block together. I went my way. I think I was getting ready to go to bed. He went his way. But the next morning, I wake up at 5, and I go into my office, and there on my Mac is this little note. Man, what did this kid know about his dad? That I had some serious pace-setting problems. that I just had the tendency to kind of be off to the races deep in my cave, and my team didn't even know what I was working on. And by the time that they figure out what you're working on, you're so far down the process, they don't feel like they get to be involved in the thinking. And so pace setters have a tendency to just really check people out. This is what they look like today, the babies in the middle there. How many of you are rapid responders? You know, an email comes in at 12 o'clock and you're like, 12:01, you know, like really fast all the time. Or if you work for somebody that's like this, what do we intend? When you're responding fast all the time, what is it that we want? Well, we want things to move along, we want to be supportive, but what is it like if you work for somebody who is responding at light speed all the time? Well, a couple things can happen. One thing that happens is you know, people kind of are like, how that email came in, 12 o'clock, it's 12:03. He's getting ready to press the send button. I'm not even going to think about this. And so people have a tendency to kind of just let the boss go for the fast ones because they can't get their thinking in otherwise. Optimists. Any optimists in here? Okay, yeah, there we go. There's the show of hands I was looking for. You know, here's the thing. Us optimists, we can see the sun on a cloudy day. We want to let people know what? What's our intention? Man, it can't be that hard. We can do this. But what happens when it is hard and your boss is always telling you that it can't be that hard? What's it like? What do we worry? Their intention is to, what's their intention? We want to motivate. But people worry that they can't see how tough it is and that they miss the struggle. And what happens when you're working for somebody that you're not sure their feet are on planet Earth? What's the result? Pretty difficult to trust a leader where we don't feel like that they've got a good handle on reality. Okay, just a few more. How about the protector? These are the leaders that there's, you know, maybe a hard problem comes in from senior management. They know that their young talent probably doesn't have a lot of experience. Maybe it's a toxic environment, so they take the hard ones. But what grows under a banyan tree? I mean, their intention is good. They want to protect people from failure. But what grows under a banyan tree? Yeah, nothing grows under a banyan tree. So what we find is that as people are protected, they don't grow the resilience required by facing those tough situations. So when the boss leaves or when they leave our tenor, they struggle to survive on their own. Or how about the strategist? This is the leader that's always talking about breaking through the next level of success. 10x thinking, big thinking all the time. But if you're not wired that way, I mean, their intention is to help people see the big picture. But if you're not wired that way and they're always talking about the big next, what can it be like for the people that work for them? Well, they worry that they've got blinders on and they can't see the big picture, so they just defer to the boss's thinking. So then we lose their thinking. Or finally, how many of you are perfectionists? You know, you want quality. Maybe you've done really well in school and you've got great grades, but if you have worked for a leader who intends to help people get A's, but they're always correcting them, what can it be like for other people? Well, we're trying to help them, but they see blood. And so what happens when we're constantly being corrected by our leader? Well, one of two things happen. Either one, we give it to them at 80% done because we know that they're going to finish it. But what's the tragedy there? Where's the growth? Maybe in that last 5%, taking it from 95 to 100%. So then people don't grow. Or everything is 120%, even when good would have been good enough. So they lose their ability to calibrate and their ability to discern when it makes sense to not go 120%. Okay, so do you see any of these in yourself? Now, you're just going to talk to somebody next to you. Let me just throw us all a bone. Hey, these are born of our very best of intentions. And if you take a look at this, so I was doing a thing for Adam Silver's group at the MBA. So I'm with the senior team, leadership team of the MBA, and we just get through these, and somebody says, it was the chief talent officer, no, it was the chief legal officer, and they say, hey, man, this is crap. This is not a problem. I want all of these things on my team. And they're kind of, develop this separation in the group. Some people were saying, no, these are not good things to have as leaders, and some people were saying, no, these are good things to have as a leader. Let me phrase it this way. If you think about this in terms of contributors, you're the coach, people that you have on your team, you're the leader. Do you want these things? Do you want somebody full of ideas? Loads of energy? Takes initiative? Steps in when they can see that their companions are struggling? Has a high standard for quality? Is optimistic? You know, these are the very things that we are promoted for. But oftentimes, when we step into a leadership role, now different, our job's not to take the field anymore. And so these can become a leadership liability, even though we have the best of intentions. So, pick one or two of these, and then talk to somebody next to you, and just go through these questions. What do you see in yourself? Which of these do you do, and why? And then explore for just a second what triggers you into the behavior. Okay, go ahead. Let's take a few minutes to have a conversation with a partner. And if you're not by somebody, just relocate. Get next to somebody. Okay, anybody here, you're a bit surprised? You can see something in yourself that you may not have thought could be accidentally diminishing others? Any surprises in here? You know, here's the thing. What I've learned is the most important conversation to have is not with the people in this room, of course. It's with your team. So here's what we'll do. We're going to build on this for the rest of the time that we're together, because this is actually the key on what really becoming a multiplier is about. First, it's this idea that when you assume that people are smart, and if you think in yourself, man, do I really believe that people are capable, that they can do things brilliantly, even if there's some things that they're not as skilled at me in, do I believe that they're capable? That's check number one. If you're not there, that would be good to admit to yourself. You have more of a diminishing tendency if you do think you're the smartest person in the room. And I've been there in my career. I had to work really hard at shifting that assumption, and you can. If you're not there and you feel like, no, I don't believe I'm the smartest person in the room, but I can see that there's some of these ways that I actually shut people down. For the rest of the time, what we're going to talk about is how can you take this to your team in a way where you can get the feedback and develop the intelligence in your team that you can shift a would-be accidental diminishing moment into an intentional multiplying moment. We'll actually get some advice from Bill Campbell on how he did this in his career, shifting from diminishing to multiplying. But let's take a break. Let's give it 15 minutes, and I'll start us back up. If you all would like to take a shorter break, which is probably not going to happen, just be back in 10 minutes. Okay. While people are shuffling back in, I'd love to hear anybody's thinking. Was there a particular accidental diminishing tendency that you saw in yourself for the first time today? Maybe some brave soul that... Over here, what was it?
Optimist.
Okay.
Even just in marriage, I would tell my wife all these ideas of like, we should do this, we should do that, and she's just like, you're not even thinking about the consequences.
Yeah. Right, yeah. No, the optimist is tough because it's bred in us, and some of us just, so I have a tendency to be an optimist. I was working in a software company, and we showed up at a trade show, and we didn't know what we were doing. We literally showed up with nothing to our booth, except for these big old tube monitors. Everybody else is showing up with these, pretty much houses that they're building, and there's a sign that they have for trade shows where it's just to mark your booth. That was the only sign that we had that marked who our company was. So I'm in the elevator with a friend of mine from Australia, and I say, yeah, it's probably good that we didn't show up like all the other people. It just makes people curious because we're different. And he looks at me, shakes his head. He's like, dude, shut up. It is terrible that you showed up wrong. But it was this problem, like optimism can really blind us from just kind of facing the reality, and that can be a problem because then it's tough to extract the learning out of that situation. Okay, anybody else? Was there an accidental diminishing tendency you saw in yourself that you hadn't seen before today? Go ahead, my friend. Okay.
Because I knew I was an optimist, but
Yeah.
I didn't realize that the optimist turns me into a rescuer
Yeah.
at times. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for a lot of us, how many of you see the rescuer in yourself? Where people kind of struggle, and it's weird too because think about yourself. A lot of times there are certain circumstances that you rescue where there are other circumstances where you don't. Like I really tended to be a rescuer with my teenage boys. But then at work, I would allow people to struggle in certain areas and vice versa. And so what's interesting is that there's certain aspects, certain situations that really trigger that rescue. And maybe we're fear of failure in the organization. Maybe we're fearful of people struggling. But there's various reasons this occurs. And so once we figure it out that we do it, then we can start to figure out the reasons why. Anybody else? A surprise, accidental diminishing tendency that you saw in yourself? For me, when I learned about this concept, I was kind of horrified. Because about half the things that I assumed about me were the very best leadership tendencies, I realized that's what made me a strong contributor, not a strong leader. And that I had to learn how to shift my behavior slightly. If I could become aware of the ways that I accidentally diminished others, then I could shift my behavior slightly to be able to turn a would-be accidental diminishing moment into intentional multiplying moment. And so before Bill passed away, we were fortunate that he liked the concept of multipliers and reached out to us and said, hey, listen, I'd love to share with you and future leaders my own experience and my journey to go from diminisher to multiplier. But there's a moment of magic in this 3-minute video that we're gonna grab. So see if you can find it.
In my early days in management, I came from a background where
I'm wondering if we could get this turned up at all. I'm just going to wait for a second to see if you can turn up the volume on this video. I'm going to go back. Just give me a thumbs up if you feel like we're good. Okay, thanks.
in my early days in management, I came from a background where, with football, the more you knew, the better you were. And I think what you do in the situations that you're in when you're management, you want to show everybody that you know everything. And so what you do is you kind of dominate the conversations, you tell people what you think, and you're not listening. And sooner or later it comes upon you that, I'm really screwing this thing up. I'm not getting the best ideas from the best people. And I think over a long period of my early career, as I look back on it, I was one of the great diminishers of all time. When I was at Apple, I was a diminisher, and yet, Donna Dubinsky, Randy Commissar, they really wanted to come and start a brand new venture with me, and we had a lot of fun. We were always close and good friends. And, they felt like at the end of my Apple time, I was getting somewhat better. And when I went to Claris and we started it, I went back to the same old way, dominating conversations, telling people what to do, making a lot of the decisions in the staff meetings. And, we had a brilliant management team, people that, you look at people that the caliber of Donna Dubinsky and Randy Commissar and the rest of them, Yogan Dalal, Dan McCammon, a lot of people that were like that. And so Donna was sent to me as an emissary from the group and sat down with me one afternoon and said, "You're back to your old ways. You're not letting us do the jobs that we were hired to do. If we can't participate with you, then it's not going to be any fun being here. If you're going to make every decision and manage everything yourself, then this company's never going to be great and we're never going to enjoy it." Whew. What a blast. And it was one of those things that when you went home that night, you recognized, God, she did me a great favor, and I really had to go about making a behavior change. And, today, I don't believe I'm like that at all. But it didn't just happen overnight. You needed to be constantly reminded that you have a tendency to try to provide your knowledge and your expertise in the situation and not listen to people who really had either different ideas or even way more capable than you are at certain functions. I had to become a multiplier. Not an easy transition, but I've made it. And today, because it's such a revelation for me, and in terms of delegating and listening to management teams, I've spent a lot of my time coaching young companies and making sure they understand the concept.
Okay, so what's the moment of magic in that story? So first of all, I want to say one thing before one of you tease this out. I love how he just ends that with, "Today I've made it." And I want to say that, to be sure, what we've learned about teaching this concept around the world is that you can make it as a multiplier. You can become a multiplier, but here's the key. What was the moment of magic in that story? It was when Donna sent to him and he's told that hey, you're really diminishing people like you were earlier in your career, and if we can't do our jobs here because you're going to do everything, this ain't going to be any fun, and we're not going to stick around. And what she really says, we're never going to be as great as we can be. And so the key to becoming a multiplier is to recognize when you, with the very best of intentions, accidentally shut people down. And if you can become aware of your accidental diminishing tendencies, or as we inherit the accidental or diminishing tendencies of the culture around us, as we can become aware of those, we can start to talk about these with the team, and we can start to recognize the trigger for a would-be accidental diminishing moment. So we can change the context and instead respond with a multiplying behavior. Let me share with you a little bit about what that might look like. So I have a tendency to be a bit of a rescuer. And what happens is when someone misses a milestone, I jump in and I take lead on the project. And I do it because I need something. I have to finish things. Anybody like me in this? Like, you got to cross it off your damn list. I have to finish things, especially if somebody's counting on that from a senior leadership perspective or one of my peers. So I get what I want when I jump in and I help. I get things back on track. The other thing, too, is I love being a contributor. I love solving problems. And so I feel like a badass. But the problem is, over time, those contributors stop taking ownership of future challenges because they know that as soon as they start to struggle, Shawn's going to jump in and get things back on track. So now that I'm aware of this, that's not the consequence that I want. I want teams to grow. So here's what I've been working on. There's a multiplier behavior that we call give the pin back. And it looks like this. Somebody struggles. You jump in, help. Think about this if we were solving a problem on a board. You can see somebody struggling to solve the problem on the board. You come into the room, they ask you, they give you the pin. You go up to the board and you start to work through the problem. You start to make a little bit of progress. Do you finish the problem? Coach me, what should I do here? We're starting to get some momentum. I can see some excitement from the team. What should I do? I should give the pin back and make them finish it. So when I walk out of that room, who owns it if I got the pin in my hand? If I complete it? I do. But if I take a step back and they go to the board, now that we've overcome that hurdle, and they finish it, the ownership stays square with them. So that gives them this confidence. I still get what I need. That fulcrum in the middle, the surface result, paramount. You will not continue to do multiplier strategies unless you get the things that you need to win. Say it again. That middle portion there, the surface result. You will not continue to try a multiplier behavior if it doesn't get you the thing that you need to win. What you want is, you want a strategy that gets you what you need to win and also gets you the hidden reward. Where not only in this scenario do I feel like a great problem solver, but I also get this opportunity to empower my team, and they grow and they trust that they can share their struggles with me in the future because they know I won't rip the pin out of their hands. So you can see, what's the key here? It's recognizing the trigger. If you can recognize that you have an accidental diminishing tendency, and then you can recognize the trigger, then it's easier to experiment with shifts to see if you get a different result. So here's what I'd like you to do. Grab an accidental diminishing tendency. Grab one of them that you saw in yourself. Rescuer, pace setter, optimist. I'll go through them real quick. So grab one of these as I go through the list. So we have the idea fountain, full of ideas. You can't turn it off. Your goal is to innovate. You've got the leader who's always on. You are full of energy. You want that energy and engagement to transfer to your team. You tend to be a rescuer. You don't want people to suffer or fail. You have a tendency to be a pace setter. You want to take initiative and go fast. You want the people to follow behind your example. So you take initiative and you are moving quickly to see if they can follow you, that you want them to speed up. Maybe you're a rapid responder or an optimist like we talked about. The strategist is the leader who thinks big, 10x thinking all the time. There's the perfectionist, the leader who wants high quality. Or maybe the protector, the leader that shields people from difficult challenges. Talk with your companion next to you. First, just share. Here's what I do that's diminishing and why I do it. Then talk about what triggers the behavior. And then finally, ask yourself this question and discuss it with your partner. When you notice that trigger, what could you do instead? And then finally, talk about why this might get something better. Let's take 5 minutes to do this with a companion. Pick one accidental diminishing tendency and let's talk through it. You know, to be sure, the likelihood that we're going to eliminate all diminishing moments is not likely. And it's probably not even necessary. A lot of times, learning how to calibrate our accidental diminishing tendencies is also learning how to inject intelligence in the situation, in the relationship, on how we work together in a way as a partnership where I can get somebody else's very best thinking. But it starts by creating an awareness. And so what we'll do is we'll give you a PowerPoint that you can share the concept of the accidental diminishers with your teams. And my invitation to you is to share the concept, and then the first thing you do is just say, hey, here's a few of these that I see in myself. Which of these do you see in me? And go around and get examples from everybody. I call that self-indict, then invite. And what it does is it creates a safer environment for your team to be able to share their own accidental diminishing tendencies, because that's what you want to do next. Okay, now which of these do we see in ourselves? And then which of these do we inherit from the culture? You know, maybe the speed's in the culture, we've got to go fast, and so we inherit rapid responding. Maybe caring's in the culture, so we you know, kind of the implication is let's look after people, and so sometimes maybe we can rescue or protect a little bit. And maybe you don't do that at home. And so a lot of times these can be culturally bred. They can also be situationally encouraged. For example, when I'm in a very unsure situation in certain situations, I ask more questions. But there are certain things I know a lot about, and so he put me in one of those scenarios, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to share 1,000 ideas. And so sometimes our accidental diminishing tendencies change in times of certainty versus certainty. Timelines change our accidental diminishing tendencies, especially the behavior of our senior leader, just your boss, really influences which accidental diminishing tendencies you might display in your team. So there's a second part of this conversation where you can start to figure out, where does it come from? What do I need? What triggers it? And you can start to work together as a team to use this lexicon to push out some of these accidental diminishing tendencies, to be able to get people's very best thinking. By recognizing the trigger and discussing it with triggers and discussing it with the team, you can shift the balance from having more diminishing experiences to having more multiplying experiences and get way more from your team. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk a little bit about, just for a few minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about if there was one thing that we saw in the research that was ubiquitous among multipliers, it was that they were intellectually curious. Let's talk about what it means. I love this quote from Tim over at IDEO. Read this and somebody shout out what you think the gem is in this quote. What do you see? He's got a fundamental point of view about something in here. Yeah, that's what leadership looks like. You know, if we can figure out what the right question is to ask, it sounds like that even works with artificial intelligence. We can provide leadership. And I think that's what Jeremy was saying today. We still have to be the leader with AI. And that's found in intellectual curiosity. You think about your multiplier. They were genuinely interested in what you thought. Or if it was an athletics coach that was your multiplier, they were genuinely interested in what you could do in that high-stakes situation. So they let you play out. They ask the questions. Multipliers are curious. They stoke their curiosity by wondering what hard thing their team is capable of, wondering what talent might you have, wondering what is the thing that we can, push the team to do and still maintain belief, wondering how can I use the intelligence of this team to make better decisions, wondering how can I hold this person accountable in a way that they grow to reach their maximum potential. This is the multiplier. They're intellectually curious. So one of the things that you can do is you can start to think through, how can I figure out the right question to ask? And so what we'll do is we'll give you a model. I'm going to walk you through this model, and then I'll share with you a little bit on how you can use this tactically to get better thinking from your team. We call it the value question ladder. The ladder symbolizes, if you're at the top of the ladder, you can see out further. This is more of an innovative space. If you're at the bottom of the ladder, you're a lot closer to the ground. This is closer to execution. So don't think of it in terms of value, in terms that higher is better. Think about it in terms of value, that we're trying to think of what situation are we in to be able to exercise intellectual curiosity in a way that's useful for that circumstance. I'm going to walk from the bottom up. At the bottom of the ladder, we have these closed-ended questions. They don't have to be conversation enders. They can be conversation starters. There was a time in my career when I was leading a $30 million project that was the linchpin for a $250 million project. So we were working as a subcontractor to Siemens, doing a project for the U.S. Department of Defense in Europe. Our project needed to go well for this other larger project to go well. I was a young, kind of rookie leader, a little bit of a cowboy in Europe, thinking that I understood the best way to get my teams thinking, and we were failing miserably. If we released one more version of software that didn't meet this kind of fault tolerance level of how many critical errors we could have, the project was going to be canceled. I remember thinking I really genuinely didn't know what to do. I'm not an engineer. I was leading a team of engineers. I was way out of my comfort zone. And so I got this team of developers together. There was about 30 of us in the room. And the only thing that I could think to say was, are we ready to ship this? And it was just dead silence. It was like a pin could drop and you could hear the pin. Mark Wood raises his hand, a senior developer, and says, we need to break up by module, list out our known issues that we think could be critical, collectively put this together and see if we think that our collective understanding of this, beyond the bugs that we know that are reported, because this was a software development project, do we feel like we are confident? They did that, took it the whole day. At the end of the day, Mark presented, and we went through kind of the known issues. Another developer, Brett Burbage, said, we should give this to the client. It doesn't look good, but it's the truth, to see if they are willing to accept this level of error. Another idea I would have never thought of. We gave the list to the client. They accepted it. We delivered the software. It met their expectations, even though we had loads of problems. It bought us 6 more months, and the project was successful. It was just a closed-ended question. Are we ready to ship this? And if you mean that, to really get information, the best thinking from your team at the right time, it can really extract intelligence. The next is the open-ended question. These are the best coaching questions in the world. When I was a young, I was 19, I was doing a nonprofit project, and there was this, in this module that we received on how to have conversations with people who are struggling, there was this open-ended question, and it was just, what else? You know, and a bunch of thought leaders since then have kind of grabbed this. Michael Bungay-Stainer grabs this as one of his 7 coaching questions. But just that when you're talking with somebody about they've got a problem, a challenge, one of the best ways that you can listen is just ask the question, what else? And it gives people a chance to go up into a space where they don't know the answers, or down into more of an execution place because they want to get things going. Open-ended questions can be a great way to elicit intelligence. Next up, you go to the leading question. Has a bad reputation because it can be used manipulatively, but it doesn't need to be. If you have an expectation that you know needs to be fulfilled, you can get a lot of people's best thinking by, for example, hey, what's the best way for us to get that proposal to the client by next Thursday? Now think about that versus this. Dude, I need you to get the proposal done by next Thursday. You feel the difference there? It's completely different. You can embed expectations in questions that open up the floor to be able to get your team members' best thinking, so that now you can participate with them in the solution rather than just being demonstrative and telling people what to do. Leading questions can be a fantastic way to get people's intelligence, because we know there's something that needs to get done. We can communicate that in the question, but participate in the thinking. Then you go up one more, you get to this guiding question, where in the guiding question, what we're trying to do is we're trying to share with people what we see as a concern without just giving them a list of our concerns. So imagine this. You go into a meeting and you list out all the concerns that you have about this project that you're going to talk about. You list them down, and then you rewrite those into the form of questions. And you go to that meeting and you just ask those questions. How different will that experience be for the people that report to you? It's not a small difference. It's a massive difference. What will you walk out of that room with? A completely different understanding about that problem than if you would have just gone in there and rattled off the concerns to everybody and tell them kind of what needs to be worked on. The guiding question is one of the very best ways that you can share your concerns in a way where other people can participate. And remember, between leaders and contributors, the playing field's never level. It's always tipped, kind of in our favor as leaders. It's just the nature of being a human. We can't turn this off, and we shouldn't try to. We should just recognize that the playing field's not even and do everything we can as a multiplier to deal with that reality. When you go up one more rung, you get into the land of discovery. These are the questions that no one has the answer to. I find that a lot of innovative leaders that are they're in a place where they need to explore, they literally say out loud, I want to talk about 3 questions I'm thinking about that I don't have the answers to. And everybody else doesn't have to, so I want to start the conversation. Discovery questions are exploration questions. They're conversation starters. But you want to create a space where people are allowed to say the dumb thing. We want to create this space to say, listen, I'm trying to discover here. And so you can frame your discovery questions to say, hey, let's explore this. None of us know the answers. Just say the first things that come to your mind. When you get to the top of the value question ladder, you get to the challenge question. This is where it's a gut check thing, where you're like, oof, we're looking at some data that I don't believe in. I think that we've got some assumptions that have got us to that data set, and I don't think we can rely on it. Or there's an idea, a belief that we have about our customer. I don't think we can build this solution on top of this belief. So you ask a question that challenges the prevailing assumptions. Like, hey, how might this data be misleading us? Now, listen, clearly the open-ended or the closed-ended question is not more or less valuable than the challenge question. If you hung out with somebody that all they did was ask you challenge questions, well, you wouldn't go get drinks with them very often. Because nobody wants that all the time. So you can see that this is a set of utility, a set of question types that you can use as utility. So here's what you can do. We'll give you this handout right here that you see. And you can use these different question types before a meeting to just generate some questions that make sense. If you're in a discovery place where no one knows the answers, write down some discovery questions. If you're going into that space full of concerns, write down your guiding questions. If there's a bunch of expectations that you're going into, write down some leading questions. But what that does is it gives your people that are reporting to you a chance to be able to step up into that space. And it shows that you are serious about what they're capable of and what they're thinking. So what I'm going to do, let me just make this real quick point. In the beginning of our careers, we're paid to have the answers. We're paid to play. And over time, we start to realize, man, that not everybody doesn't have all the answers, and I sure as heck don't have the answers. And if you recognize that no one has the answers yet, as you move into a leadership position, then you recognize also where the value proposition is. It's not for you to have the answers, but it's for you to guide the team in a way where they can come up with the best answers. So let's take a look at a few shifts that we've talked about just a little bit, but in this last few minutes we're together, we'll provide these to you as options for you to respond to a diminishing trigger. So if you have an accidental diminishing trigger, maybe you're a pace setter, we're going to give you some behaviors that if you watch for that trigger, you can test a multiplier behavior in your response. So we talked about this idea of you can sit down with people and you can clarify who's the owner by making sure that they know that they own 51% of the vote. You can clarify what it will mean for you to support them with 49% of the vote. And then you can clarify what great works look like. What does done look like? What does out of bounds look like? What does great look like? As you define what things look like, it makes it a lot easier to hold them accountable for 100% of the outcome. We talked about this idea of giving the pin back, especially if you're a domain expert. They're going to come to you and ask you for help because that's why you're there. You are a leader and a domain expert. A lot of us will be in those positions. But our goal is to not finish problems. It's to help get them going in the problems, and then we hold them accountable for those results. Now, if you recognize It's irresponsible to give the pin back to somebody where you know they will fail. That's irresponsible. And so if you're helping and you recognize that I can't give the pin back to the leader in good faith, then the question is, who's their buddy? Am I their buddy? Is there somebody else on the team? Is there a coach? Is there a resource? So if it's difficult for you to give the pin back, meaning you are doing a gut check and you don't feel confident in giving the pin back to that individual, don't be irresponsible. Pause. Figure out what will they need to be able to bear the weight of that pin and solve that damn problem. We can make this shift from telling people that it's okay to fail, but rather to really clarify where it is not okay to fail in the organization, like you will get fired if you don't get W's, and where it's okay to experiment. Think about it like this. Highway, high stakes, things are moving fast, can't play on the highway, playground. We want innovation here, we want crazy thinking, and then sometimes there's a space in the middle. But people need to know this, and you need to know this. Think about it in terms of rescuing or protecting. If you have a tendency to rescue people because they're failing in areas that you know that you can't tolerate failure, you're not going to stop rescuing because you can't lose there. So you have to come up with a different situation. In other words, you won't stop doing that accidental diminishing behavior until you address the real problem, which is their inability to win in that area that requires a W. And so it may be something different that you need. So to slow down that rescuing, you may need to provide them with a resource. They may need to do a different job. And since we all know that you can't multiply 0, what we're not saying in the multipliers equation is that people aren't expected to perform. But rather, you are there to stretch them beyond to their maximum limits through your intellectual curiosity and your skill. If you clarify where it's okay to make mistakes and where it's not okay to make mistakes, you can create this environment where people know where they take risks and know when they need help, so then you'll do less rescuing. There's this thing that our multipliers do, and that's before they give us a stretch challenge, they take a breath to go, how hard should this be? And they're not irresponsible in giving us challenges that are too hard. That just breaks us. Anybody here worked for a leader that just broke you? They expected things that were impossible? That's not good. We've had that experience. We want to figure out what the stretch is. But as we did earlier, it was you and me that were doing stretching the band, right? We want to get the stretch to where it's enough that they feel supported, but they can lean into it. So the question is, before I give this really hard challenge to this individual, how can I calibrate this to make sure that they can step into that challenge, that they don't lose belief? And that just takes a little bit of thinking or a conversation. Hey, how big should this challenge be? The great thing about a good stretch challenge, you all know, as athletes, you know that it stimulates you to do things that you didn't think you were capable of. But belief is a critical part in this, and that means you've got to get the tension right. Another thing that you can do is, anybody here has the gift of gab? Like, you have a tendency to be always on, and you talk a lot, and you can suck all the air out of the room. One of the things you can do is, before you go into a meeting, you can ask yourself, what are the things that I need to play big on? Like chips. So maybe you only get 3 chips in an hour meeting. 3 3-minute plays. So you're going to create a lot of space, a lot of air for people to contribute. So you can just write down, here's where I'm playing big. I'm going to play it big at the beginning. I'm going to set the challenge. I'm going to play big in the middle because there's this thing that I want to talk about after everybody else has had a chance to talk. And then I'm going to play big at the end to make sure that everybody leaves here knowing what their assignments are. And the rest is space. So you can figure out, where should I be playing my chips in any given situation, so that way you create the necessary space for people to step up and play big. And if you know that you want people to play some chips, well, before that meeting, you can say, hey, you know what, could you go a little bit bigger on this thing that I know you're working on? I really like your point of view, and I'd like for you to really step up for a while in this meeting and let the team know what you're up to and what you're doing. So this kind of gets us almost to the end. I've got a fun little request for you. So before we move on to this final point, I'm working on a project right now. There's a book coming next year. It's called Pause. It's how to lead brilliant work in a busy world. And essentially what I studied for 3.5 years was, what do the best leaders do to help knowledge workers focus? Anybody here leading people that they win by thinking? They're knowledge workers? Any leaders here where that's the team that you're on? You need people to think. Well, the question that we wanted to know is, what can leaders do to create a space where people can think in a world where there is no space for thinking? And we found some pretty brilliant answers to what these leaders are doing. And right now we're collecting stories about, so check and see if you've got a leader that you could share an experience with. One of the things that came back is, leaders that create space for people to play big in a very distracting world is they are insanely awesome at clarifying what matters in a way that people can act decisively and with confidence. If you have worked for a leader who was brilliant at this, and you'd like for us to learn their story so we can share it, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to, so if you can think of somebody and just share kind of like a few sentences what they're like, I'll reach out to you, set up like a 15-minute call, and would really love to get your story if you've got a leader who was brilliant at clarifying what mattered in a way that gave you the ability to act decisively and with confidence, even in an otherwise kind of foggy, challenging, chaotic situation. Thanks so much if you do. Okay, so let's go back to where we started. We started looking at our leaders who were either multipliers or diminishers to us. And as we look through that lens, we can really see it, can't we? We all know what it's like to be diminished. So let's flip the lens. As you think about the people that work on your team or will work on your team in the future, what do they need from you? Do they need a genius? Or do they need a genius maker? Looking at that question, let's look through the eyes of Zia at Park City, her first time on the 60-foot ski jump.
Here goes something, I guess. Oh. Okay, you can do this. I'm gonna jump.
You got it.
Whoa, my ski's slipping off.
Just remember, never snowplow, okay?
No snow plows.
Keep it straight and you'll be fine. Do
Okay.
the same thing you do on the 20.
Straight. Do you go faster on the in run?
Little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
Is it any steeper, do you think? Not much?
Same steepness, it's just longer.
Well, just longer. Just longer. Just a bigger 20, that's all.
Yep. Have
It's a
fun.
bigger 20. Go ahead. You got this. I got it.
It's fine. You'll be fine.
Okay. Here
The longer you wait, you'll be more scared.
I go. Just the suspense at the top at the first time freaks you out. That's the only thing. It's so fun.
Was it 60?
Huh? 60 seems like nothing now. Whoa!
As leaders, maybe it's our moral responsibility to figure out what is that challenge, to really get the very best thinking and to help someone grow to reach their maximum potential, because that's what people want from us. What they really need is for us to use our intelligence to access theirs, where we use our intelligence as a tool versus a weapon to help them really do the best career of their lives. They need genius makers. Hey, thanks so much. It's been really fun to be with all of you today. Have a fantastic rest of your time.